You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 240 for June 1st, 2022. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about the books that shaped our careers. So, get ready to use those Audible credits because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Heather in California.
Hi, everyone.
Andrew in, wait for it, California.
Hey, hello, everybody.
And Bill, also in California.
Yes, good morning. But where are you? That's the question. Where are you today?
I know. Today I am in Seaside, Oregon. Lovely Seaside, Oregon. It's a town just south of Astoria, between Cannon Beach and Astoria. And those Cannon Beach and Astoria are two towns you may know if you're fans of the movie Goonies. So
I'm also of just the Oregon coast, so I know that town too.
Yeah.
There's a new movie, Goonies. I think it has a guy. There's a guy in it that hasn't done anything ever since, and that he's in a movie that my son said you have to go see this. It's called Everything, Everyone, All at Once, and he's in it. I'll get the name of it anyway. Okay. It was really good. Yeah. Very cool. Weird sci-fi movie. It was one of those things that you think it's like a dream. You know, have you ever had those dreams where they make complete, total sense in your dream and they're so weird, but then you wake up and you can't remember everything? That's this movie.
Wow.
That's good.
Right then.
I think it might be the guy who played Short Round in Indiana Jones. Like he was in Goonies and Indiana Jones, and that's it.
Nice.
Okay. I think it's that guy, the kid.
Is he Asian?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's him.
Nice.
Okay.
All right. Well, speaking of media that makes no sense, let's talk about archaeology books.
Hey, I write those, man. Come on.
I know. So, as you guys know, we have been, as the listeners know, we have been alternating topics, and this week it's Bill's turn. So, Bill, let's have your topic and your thoughts behind why you wanted to do this.
Yeah, sure. The topic that I want to talk about today, after these 240 episodes, we still have never talked about the stuff we're reading, right? And as archaeologists, we spend a lot of time reading. That's pretty much the whole job, is like reading and writing, and then on the side, you do some excavation. I mean, you spend like, I don't know, I spent hours and hours reading. I ended up doing well because I learned how to speed read when I was undergrad. So that really helps me be able to skim a lot of books and a lot of stuff. But these are books that I actually read for real. And the reason why I thought about it is because I have classes, and as I came up through archaeology, we just had to do a lot of reading. I mean, whether it was going to the library and having to get, I don't know if you all remember this, but you used to have to go to the library and there would be this folder of these reserves for each week. And there were all these articles that the professor was too cheap to actually print off on paper, or the paper would have taken more than your tuition's worth to print it all. And so they outsource it all to you to print it. Or if you're cheap like me, you can just sit there and skim the article and write down notes and have enough for you to be able to show up to class knowledgeable. So I remember those reserves, right? And you would show up to the library front desk, tell them the class, and they'd give you this massive, disheartening pamphlet of articles that you have to look through. And then sometimes we had to buy books, right? Definitely everybody understands about the book situation, where back in the 20th century, when we were buying books for college, they were still in the double digits. And now you look online for the books that they want your student to read or to buy, and it's like $180. And you're shaking your head like, this person is never going to touch this thing after this day. Why would you ever force them to buy a $200 book?
Yeah.
But it's all about, making money, right? So I still get all the reserves and everything, but now we can get them on PDF and put them online for the students to read. Nevertheless, you still have to read a lot. And so the question are, what are the books that people are reading that are impactful, that changed our careers and made us think really about what we were doing. So that's what I want to talk about today. What are the most impactful books that we've read in our career, right? The books that shaped our career. So who wants to go first?
Well, you know what? I think I didn't put a lot of books on this list, and I'll tell you why. Because in fact, Bill, some of the ones that you put on here are books that I have read as well, and I think really did influence my thinking. But when I really think of books that shaped my career, I took that to heart because I want to know, things that either ignited my passion for something or changed the way I thought about something. That's kind of how I thought about that. And I only put two things down because, to be honest, I'm not doing a whole lot of CRM archaeology anymore. And I've had some books that have influenced like that decision ultimately. And one of the ones that I could think about was Brian Fagan's 2003 Before California.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's on my list.
It's a good book.
Yeah. And Brian Fagan writes he writes some, in-depth stuff, well-researched things, but it's more written for a popular audience. And being able to, in 2003, in fact, I didn't read this in 2003. I read it years later when I was in Nevada. I think it was, 2010, 12, something like that when I actually read it. So by then I was out of my master's degree and, I read all the technical stuff, read all the Tom King books and Trigger and, all those things. And I'm like, yeah, okay, these are tools that I need to be an archaeologist. But when I read this book, I'm like, oh, so archaeology can be written so people can actually understand it and you can communicate to the wider public. And I think that is actually what sort of triggered my want to present archaeology in a different way. And since I'm not like a super strong writer and I can't do anything like Brian Fagan can, I'm not a good writer in that sense anyway. I decided to start podcasting, and podcasting was my outlet and my way to bring archaeology to a wider community that I felt I could be good at. And I think this book was definitely an impetus for that.
Yeah, I kind of went the same direction. For me, actually, it's interesting. My dad's a physicist. And when I was young and into archaeology, his answer to everything was throw a book at you. And it was usually, he was a major used book person. So you would get used books, used textbooks. And that's what, as kids, he would just say, hey, read this. If you're still awesome. Interested in it, then we'll talk. And he gave me, this is me growing up in Chicago, right? So he found a bunch of Brian Fagan books. Little did I know where it would take me, but it definitely lit a fire for me. It made me, and this is like, I'm 10, 11, 12 reading Brian Fagan books, and they were readable to me. And they excited me. Now you could say that's a commentary on me being a strange young person, or the fact that Brian Fagan is extremely readable and understandable. And so for me, I love this topic. I have a few other books sprinkle as our talk goes, but for me, I kind of looked at what were the ones that were really fun for me to read. What were the ones that I still pick up as a professional? To me, those are the ones that totally make a difference in my life. And there are ones that I read when I was in school that I still pick up as a professional. I'll start with the first one that to me was, other than the Brian Fagan, that was really fun for me in graduate school to read. And that was Cows, Pigs, Wars, and Witches by Marvin Harris. I loved that book. To me, that was a lot of fun to read. That's not an archaeology book, but more of a cultural anthropology book. But that was kind of a fun book for me. I enjoyed that one. It kind of just talks about why things are the way they are from his perspective, whether that's right or wrong. But it's a fun book to read. If your professor has you read it, at least it's one of those books that you're not sitting having a hard time getting through.
Yeah.
So
that's the thing that I think really has helped shape me too, is those really readable, fun books. Like I said, there's all the tool books that we just need to have on the shelf so we can refer back to and go to. But I don't know if they necessarily shaped how I think as an archaeologist and how I think about interacting with, other people that are not archaeologists. And that's what that's what I like about the Brian Fagan books, and any book that, kind of does that. Andrew.
Yeah, sure. As a direct disciple of Brian Fagan, I took Brian Fagan as a freshman my first year. I have nothing but good things to say about the guy. And why aren't there more Brian Fagans out there? That's what we need in archaeology so desperately. And honestly, people like us on this podcast are trying to be Brian Fagans, but we're a very small group, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, with Brian Fagan, with his intro class that I took, I'm going with Archaeology, A Brief Introduction by Brian Fagan.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It was the third edition at the time, and it was small. And I read it, and I could envision myself carrying this book because it was physically small, like in my backpack in the jungle somewhere. I'm like,
Yes.
Here I am. I'm an archaeologist with this book, and I have it just in case, and even though it's just a textbook, I still look back to that sometimes. And it's not because I need to relearn archaeology. It's almost because I need to re-energize my soul. I look at it and I remember and I go, yeah, this is what it's all about.
Nice.
Brian Fagan's so good at writing about those topics that come up that people use as kind of an impetus behind theory, and he makes them so much easier to understand.
Yeah.
And he's so good. He is so prolific. It's crazy. In fact,
he's a machine.
Show you how prolific he is. He has written, as a sailor, everywhere you go, there's these coastal cruising guides, or there's these cruising guides that you really should have because they give you the insight for sailing in that one specific area. And he has written the Bible for California, like coastal California, Central Coast California, all the way down to Baja California. And so when I got into the sailing community, people are like, oh my gosh, you have to get this book. This is the Bible for sailing in the area. And I'm like, oh, okay. So they tell me the name. I look it up and it has Brian Fagan. I'm like, oh, that must be a mistake. That's not the one. It must be. The algorithms in my computer are bringing up Brian Fagan. That can't be right. And sure enough, that's right. So that's how prolific he's actually successful in other areas outside of archaeology. But
yeah. Nice.
I'll throw, just because the Brian Fagan topic, I'll throw one more and then let's, I guess, open it up again. I'm going with Brian Fagan's Lord and Pharaoh, which is recent. I believe it's maybe 2015.
Oh, I haven't read that.
2016. Yeah. So what he does is it's the story of King Tut juxtaposed against Lord Carnarvon. And they go back and forth in time, chapter by chapter. It's excellent because it just talks about the person. It shows how many similarities between the two people. It's amazing. Such a good piece. But it influenced me because I had Brian Fagan come and talk to my Egyptology class. And when he was standing there talking, like in my class, and I introed him and stuff, I had that moment where I'm like, oh my God, I kind of am Brian Fagan. I think I made it. I think I made it, and it was just, again, one of these like super important moments to my soul.
One little bit of trivia just to kind of, I don't know if this is why you wrote it, but do you know the connection of Lord Carnarvon to a well-known TV series that's now a movie right now?
Yeah.
Downton Abbey, right?
Downton Abbey, yeah.
Downton Abbey. So that's Highclere Castle is Lord Carnarvon's castle. So if you were to go to Downton Abbey, or the real Downton Abbey, Highclere Castle, they have a King Tut exhibit in their basement.
Like in the basement. I know.
What?
Yeah.
Don't show that on. That would be something that would actually make me want to watch Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
You should. It's a great. I'm a huge Downton Abbey fan, but yeah.
Those exterior shots, that's Lord Carnarvon's house.
Yep.
Wow.
Well, the Brian Fagan that I'll throw on the fire is Ancient North America, because that was one that I remember we had for many of my one of my undergrad classes, Native American Archaeology. And I read all of the chapters, including the ones that we didn't even have to read because we didn't have, the professor asked us to buy the whole book, and then we only read like 4 of the chapters for class. But I read the whole thing, and it's like a 300 and something page, door stopper. But just like you were saying, the hours just passed easily because it was really interesting, and you're reading about different parts of North America, and even, years later after I've, read that book, some of those descriptions of archaeology of certain regions and stuff, it still holds up. And the book's, 10, 15, 20 years old.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Good. I was just looking on Audible actually to see what Brian Fagan books are on Audible, because since I do a lot of driving, I listen to some audiobooks. He's got a brand new book coming out in like a month. He's 85. Yep. It's called The Rape of the Nile, and it might actually be out. I'm not sure, but the audiobook comes out in June.
Yeah, no, Rape of the Nile, his original, I think it's the first book he ever wrote from like the 1970s. And then he re-upped it. So I was almost going to put Rape of the Nile on here too, because Rape of the Nile it really talks about Giovanni Belzoni, who's a famous looter, and it talks about looting in Egypt. And so he wrote that early in his career. Then he wrote Lord and Pharaoh later in his career. And it's actually really cool. They're both great.
Yeah, because I can't find Lord and Pharaoh on here, so I'll pre-order that. Yeah, nice.
And I think another one he wrote that I really liked was The Little Ice Age. So anybody interested in climate change, he talks about the Ice Age from the 1300s, the 1800s. But it's that's a great book, and it puts things in context. So he draws it back. He doesn't just talk about that Ice Age. He draws it into what's happening today.
Nice. Well, I think to close this out, I won't close it with a Brian Fagan book, although we could probably just talk about Brian Fagan books the whole time. And I think Andrew said he was going to try to get Brian on the show, but he hasn't really come through with his. I guess Andrew's not as famous as we thought he was to be able to get these other celebrities.
Dude, I'm a total fraud and a sham. I'm sorry, it's best to know now.
Andrew, I'm telling you, you tell him. I really think we should do it from the boat.
Oh, I think that would be. Yeah, we'll see.
It would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
just go out in the harbor a little bit.
Right.
Just go past the harbor. He lives here.
Right.
You and I could take him out there. Try not to kill him.
Yeah, no pressure. No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah, don't kill Brian
we're
Fagan.
Here to kidnap you, but can you come on this boat?
Just speak into this microphone.
Into this microphone.
All right. Well, I'll mention one more that was in it's not, it's fiction, but fiction based on real principles. Fiction used to talk about real principles. And a lot of people hated this book, but I just loved the way that it was presented for some reason. But Adrian Praetzellis's Death by Theory.
Death by Theory.
And
for some reason, I just really liked that book. And
That's
the one I linked to here is 2011 because it's the revised edition. But I definitely read that when I was in my undergrad back in the early 2000s. And it was just, I don't know. I really liked, again, the way that it was presented. And I'll have to find a link to this as well. We interviewed Adrian Praetzellis on either this show or one of my shows a few years ago. So, Bill, do you remember that at all? I don't remember if he was on CRM Mark or not, but I'll have to look it up.
I remember it. Also, Adrian, he's a pretty cool guy, pretty interesting guy. Talking about people that you'd want to be when you get older. He started, well, he didn't start it, but he definitely maintained for decades, along with his wife, the archaeology, the CRM program at Sonoma State. So for years, for years they were doing that. And so that's totally like talking about guys that you want to be like, folks you want to be like. That's definitely one of them.
He's either still there or is like an advisor or something like that too.
I think an advisor. I'm pretty sure they're retired.
Yeah, both of them.
I give that book to everybody on my staff for Christmas. Nice. I do. I have like a list that obviously people come and go, or we add to the staff. So, but that's one I make sure I give right off the bat is Death by Theory. Yep. And who introduced me to that? It's Andrew.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I just do it all.
There you go. Well, as I know, I'm not sure about Heather, but I know as Andrew, Bill, and I wait for our books to eagerly show up on this list, let's take a break and come back on the other side and keep talking about books. Back in a minute. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Register of Professional Archaeologists and the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and check out the link in the show notes. Welcome back to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 240, and we're talking about books that shaped our careers. And since I really only have one more that is on my, I guess, foundational list, and it might seem odd, again, to have this book on there, but it's Riches to Rust by Eric Twitty. Yeah. And if you've ever worked in an area with a lot of heavy mining equipment and stuff like that, like Nevada, like pretty much all of Nevada, and lots of parts of California as well, Utah, pretty much the Intermountain West, and again Eastern California, then this book is almost a necessity. And not only because it has indices in the back that just have an amazing array of measurements and just things in there to help you identify things, but I'll tell you what, when I started doing CRM, just because that was the career path that I was going down, I wasn't really interested in anything historic, to be honest. I was always interested in older stuff. In college, I was always into like paleoanthropology, but I got rejected from ASU's PhD program one time and never looked back. I was like, okay, great. Not going to do that program. I just ended up going into CRM, and I just like hated historics. It was just like not old enough, and I hated it. Absolutely hated it. And I know. And I finally get to Nevada, and then it's all just like mining stuff. And I'm like, seriously? I got to record like old cans and cement platforms with bolts coming out of them? What is this garbage? Until somebody put me onto that book, and I read it. I read the whole thing in like a weekend, and it's not that long of a book, but you can read it pretty quick. And it just got me really excited about the actual use. And when you think about the use of certain things and the fact that you can have a concrete platform of a certain size with a bolt pattern and know what kind of equipment was on there, and then extrapolate that out to, well, there was these kinds of other artifacts and structures along with this equipment, which means these people were doing this. And you start to paint this picture in your head of what life was actually like on that site, which I think is what, to me, what archaeology is all about, is painting that picture and then painting that picture for other people. And that really kind of ignited initially my passion for working on that kind of stuff. And it made it so I didn't hate my job because it was all historics. And I was just like, really I hate this. And it really brought it back into it for me.
Not only that, but with mining sites, you're kind of actually looking at the reverse image, the missing things of where there were things, right? Like, totally. a tent platform, well, that used to be someone's house, and there was a tent, and there used to be wood and all this other stuff, but the only thing we're left is this platform. Or, like an open cut, now there's a hole in the ground now that we're measuring and looking at. But that used to be rock with a vein of something there, and that's why they were digging. So that's interesting that you'd say that.
Yeah, and you can often tell the success of a mine and how long it was around by some of the stuff that was left behind. For example, if you look at some of the equipment and you can identify what was on there, you can almost identify down to like the brand that was on there, because they all had different bolt patterns and stuff. And if they're using like a really expensive, pump or something like that, well, they're pulling a lot of material out and they're doing really well. Right. And if you see a tent platform and around the edges of it, you not only have nails, but you have plate glass. Well, plate glass, again, was something you only brought in if you're there for a long time and you're being successful. Right. Otherwise, it's just like it's actual tents. And so all those kinds of things, this book helped bring that in. And it was just, I guess, influential for me as far as my work in Nevada goes. Yeah,
I like that.
Very cool.
That reminds me a lot of because I ended up having the opposite thing of being like, no offense, Native Americans, but being like, broken rocks. Like, seriously, man, like we're looking at these handful of these rocks, and I can pretty much tell you what they are. Chert, chalcedony. Okay, Brad, now we've got a site. We've got 13 broken pieces of rock. Whereas if you're at this tent platform thing, you can imagine pumps and electric generators and all this different stuff that's going on there. Or if you're at someone's farmstead or house, you can look at all these different plates and different stuff and think, oh, they were taking this medicine and they were doing that, and here's how they did their laundry. I just thought that historical stuff was way more interesting, right? Mm-hmm. But you do find those artifact categories that you really kind of cringe at. Yeah. And brick is definitely one, especially since we don't really even keep it, right? Bricks. You're just kind of like, oh my God, what are we going to do with all these? But when you mention that reminds me of Carl Gerke's Bricks and Brick Making, the handbook of bricks, and it tells you, how they were made, and, just like you were saying, what level of technology you're using, how hard they were fired. Were they used for, are they fireproof bricks? Are they just regular bricks that people were using for their house? What are the dimensions? What sizes? A lot of our streets used to be made out of bricks. Then all of a sudden, these brick fragments and these different colors of bricks and the markings on them, it tells you a little bit more. So that's another book that I used to hate, broken up pieces of brick or even whole bricks. But after reading that book, then it definitely changed a lot of the ways that I think about that kind of artifact too.
It's kind of a metaphor for life, isn't it? The more you learn about something, the more you respect and understand it.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say something about me being a blockhead, like those bricks, and then there's you here. And no wonder you don't understand the utility, because you're staring at something that's very similar. It's almost as if it was a mirror, Bill.
You're a brick.
A brickhead.
Brickhead.
Nice.
I think, in any book that allows, especially for archaeologists, you guys talking about this progression from I hate this set of artifact types to, this is like interesting, is a book that allows you to kind of nerd out. It gives you the ins and outs of that artifact type so that you understand it. So I think, for those of us that are archaeologists, that's something that kind of gets us going, is if we can really understand the detail and break something down, if we can understand it enough that we can, like Bill said, work it backwards, then that becomes interesting to us. And I think, so any book that can do that, and, I think a lot of us have been on that path where either we really like historics and we don't like prehistorics, or the other way around, it's just a matter of learning more about it and the ins and outs, and a book that can can inspire you to nerd out on a subject is obviously a successful book as far as archaeology goes.
Yeah.
I'm definitely adding these. There's plenty of bottle books. I'm going to look. I have one, but I don't have it with me. It's at my office, but I'm going to look it up while we're talking. But for me, it goes a little bit, it's not a material. Although if you want to look at a material book that everybody should have, and I think a majority of people have, is the Human Bone Manual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not a replacement for a human osteologist. As a human osteologist myself, it's not a replacement, but it's
sure it is. Sure it is.
Not for the long term, Andrew, but it definitely will it will help you not make stupid mistakes.
Yeah.
And that Human Bone Manual is such a great book. It could be so much bigger, but it understands that it's big, it's small enough to be able to bring with you in the field. And that book it's awesome. So for anybody who doesn't know about it, look it up. The Human Bone Manual by Tim White and Peter Folkens. Everybody should have it.
I would say indispensable in the field. Again, because you can, in the field, just look, and the photos are so great. You can just go, oh, okay, it is a deer bone.
And they're to scale. They're to scale.
To scale, exactly. It's great.
Yeah, that's what's really important. And it shows you sighting. Because when it comes to human, it will not allow you to do full analysis, although it could do partial, but it will certainly help you identify whether or not it's human or non-human, which is obviously very important.
Yeah.
So
nice.
Huge.
Bill, is Tim White still at Berkeley, or is he fully retired by now?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about. Since,
never mind then.
The anthropology department is actively trying to repatriate grave goods and do right by NAGPRA, be in compliance, and some actors who will remain unstated explicitly will just spend their entire career to make sure that we don't repatriate anything. So I don't know. Well, the Bone Manual is an excellent book and a totally useful item, but we shall not talk about that. At least I shall not, because I don't know. I'm trying to get tenure here, so I'm not going to say anything about it.
Well, and it's not just Berkeley. All UC schools are doing that.
Yeah,
it's across the board. But,
nice.
Anyway,
in terms of those nuts and bolts books, I have a few more. The book that is simply called the Archaeological Survey Manual by White and King. I make all my archaeology survey students buy it. It's one of those ones that goes in and out of publication. It's always on the edge, but it's a fantastic, it shows stuff like this is how to fold your map. Like, I love stuff like that. It takes you down to brass tacks. And it's like, when you're standing there in the field, this is how to do the stuff, and it takes you through how to use a compass. It's fantastic. And there's even one or two almost kind of lighthearted jokes in there. It's great. It's for a technical manual, basically, supremely readable. I love it. I'll also say, and you've heard me talk about this before on the podcast, Where There Is No Doctor. That book was so huge for me. Like you're sitting there in the jungle of Belize and you're like, man, I have this horrendous rash on my knee and it's not getting better. You look it up and it makes you feel better. And you're like, oh, I can go to the local pharmacy and get this stuff and I'll be okay. I love that book for field.
I'll say, just for non-field, this is definitely not one that you want to bring in the field with you, but for a CRM professional is absolute must. And that's Tom King's Cultural Resources, Laws and Practice.
Right.
Absolutely. It can be a heavy read, especially for somebody who's new into CRM. But if you want to progress in your profession and let's say you want to be in the field, but you understand that that's probably not going to be the place to progress in this profession, or that your body's not going to be able to survive if you do this for 40 years. That is indispensable. I mean, you have to have that book and you have to read it. And I, go back to it all the time. It gives you, just like Tom King he's a different kind of writer than Brian Fagan.
Yeah.
But Tom King is an amazing, he is also very good. He's obviously very intelligent man, but he's very good at bringing things down to an understandable level. And when it comes to regulatory language and being able to apply regulatory language and the spirit of it, that's what I love the most. And there's nobody better to write it than him, because he was there from the very beginning. He's the one that wrote the laws from the very beginning. And so he understands the spirit behind the regulatory laws that we are practicing every day in our profession. And so that book right there, it gives you how to practice, but it also gives you why. Yeah. The whys behind all those laws. Yeah.
And that might sound like a pretty boring book to read, and it's a really thick subject. But to the way Tom King writes, that's the whole thing. Is there's humor in it. There's he has a lot of sarcasm in his writing, which is also humorous. And it's just like, if you've ever heard Tom King speak, or if you've listened to this podcast, he's been on a number of times, or seen any of his comments on Facebook. It's exactly written that way. Like, he doesn't hold anything back.
Those are the best, because, and it's funny because in the beginning, I was like fiercely like a defensive for him. And I would get so mad that people would say things, just like arrogant, sniveling brats were like saying these stupid things to him, having no idea who he is. And then I would like step up and say, okay, listen, you want to Google this, and here you might want to read up before you open your mouth, okay? And prove yourself to be a complete and utter fool. But he loved it. You could tell he loves that kind of just very slowly, kind of with a little bit of bait, bringing people into his trap. He has no problem. In fact, I think he enjoys people acting like he's some crazy old man. If you could write a book or have a book of just his Facebook comments, I think it'd be like a bestseller. That's really fun.
Oh, that needs to be a segment, like Tom King, like the mean tweets thing. Tom King reads his own Facebook comments.
Let's do it. Oh my gosh. Yes. That would be awesome.
This book, I put this one on here too. This is one of the original ones that I put on here. And the reason why is I went to a university. It can be named Boise State University, great football team, whack university. And I got almost no like mentorship whatsoever until my very last year. great guy, Max Pavicic, kind of ended up taking me under his wing because he realized here's this kid that's about to graduate that no one has ever talked to like ever about anything that wants to do archaeology, right? So I was given like no opportunities, no nothing. No one ever took any notice of me in class. They didn't think I was really serious about being an archaeologist. And so I went to this school where it was just put tuition in, get degree at the end. And, you're on your own to figure out what you're going to do with your life. And I think we talked about it several times, but at a certain point, Pavicic saw me working at Costco and was like, "What are you doing? I thought you were going to do archaeology." Well, here's what you do. You go try to find a job at a cultural resources company. And I was like, "What's that?" He's like, "Oh, that's what we used to do before I became a professor. That's what everybody does if you want to do archaeology." And so that was kind of what let me know that you could really do this as a career. Because at that time, I had no idea. I thought you had to be a professor to do archaeology in the United States because no one had ever told me anything at my university.
What a shame.
And so I got into Idaho for my master's at the same time I was applying for to get a job. I also realized you have to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. That's why I went back for my master's. So I applied for universities. I got in at Idaho, and one of the first classes I took, there was a joint Washington State, University of Idaho kind of shared campus situation where Washington State's strong program in Northwest prehistoric archaeology and Mesoamerican archaeology, we could take classes in that, which we didn't have at Idaho. And they could take the historical archaeology classes that we had. So the campuses are only 8 miles apart. And one of the first classes I took there was cultural resource management at Washington State. And our textbook was this book, Cultural Resources, Law and Practice. And that's what really, like you said, it let me know why this stuff is happening. Like, why does this exist? What are we supposed to do? How do the laws work? And ever since then, I've just continued looking back at that book. I used to have students read it in my class, but now there's another one that I have students read. But I still always recommend people buy this one because it's a good handbook for knowing the laws and the regulations.
Hey, Bill, which one do you have your students read now?
Oh, the new one that I have them read is Scott Anfinson's Practical Heritage Management.
Oh, okay.
It's like 2019, I think, 2018. And so it came out at the same time as Tom King's 4th edition of Cultural Resources, Law and Practice.
Right.
And the only reason I have them do the other one is because they could get it as a textbook. And also, I think that they have the university library has an e-version of it. So they could get it for free. And it's on their laptop. There's like no reason basically for you to say you can't read this week's readings.
Yes.
That's the only reason why. That's it.
That's
right.
I totally get it.
No, the Anfinson book is good, though. I'll tell you that. And if you have been reading Tom King, Scott Anfinson does a great job. He used to be the state historic preservation officer, I think, in Minnesota for years and years. And he's been doing it for a long, long time. So in that book, you also get a whole breadth of different perspectives. And it does a great job of breaking the laws down, too. So check that one out, too.
All right. Well, with that, we will see you on the other side and finish up our discussion about books that shaped our career. Be sure to look down at your phone because all of the links to the stuff we're talking about and possibly links to stuff we haven't gotten to are in the show notes. So it's a good resource of things to see what has influenced us and what we like. Back in a minute. Welcome back to episode 240 of the CRM Archaeology Podcast, segment 3. And we're talking about books that shaped our careers. And, well, let's just open it up. Who's next? We've got only one segment left. So let's get your heavy hitters that we haven't talked about yet.
Okay. I have 2 more coming down. First, I want to give a shout out to Skull Wars by David Hurst Thomas. I think It does a great job of bringing students, into what is NAGPRA and how sort of the history, the Native American history versus the history of archaeology, and bringing it together. I would call it eminently readable. And I would say of probably every book I've ever given to students, it's the one they come to talk to me about like years later. So it's so readable, and it does such a good job of threading that needle with some really complex topics.
Yeah.
Then I also have one that people won't know as well, which is called In Search of Maya Sea Traders by Heather McKillop. And as we all know, I'm a Mayanist kind of first and foremost. And Heather's book I loved because she put her own field experience very, very much into it. And again, very readable. She just talks about what it was like to start her project and what it was like working in an area of the Maya world that not many had really worked on before, and the daily grind of trying to make it happen. And at the same time, talking about very technical aspects of doing Maya archaeology. So she kind of brings it all together. And again, very readable. You know, I go back to that one and go like, oh, okay, you can write something like this and it works, you know?
Nice.
So I like that one as well.
You know, hey, I do have one more book, and I'm not just saying this for reasons that'll become known in a minute. It's something I thought about, and we need to get it on the list, Bill. But it's Small Archaeology Project Management by Dr. William A. White. I'm not even kidding. Bill, when you came out with that book, yeah, I was starting my company, and, you know, I'd managed some projects before, but it always helps to, you know, even if you think you know everything, you absolutely do not, right? I don't care how much experience you have. Listening to other people's experiences or reading about those and how they approach things is a way that you can take little bits of information from there, you know, use what you need and don't use what you don't need. And that's what I think most authors expect out of their books. And I think it's a great book for anybody who is currently managing projects or is thinking about becoming a project manager and wants to increase those skill sets. And what, Bill, I think you can get it for like $5 on Amazon or something like that. I mean, it's a totally, you know, it's nuts and bolts. It's short and to the point, and it's a good one to have on the list.
I actually agree. I've been secretly spying on Bill's wares on the Amazon world. And those are great, man. I'm going for the entire Bill collection, man.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
You celebrate his entire catalog.
Yeah, I do. I celebrate it all.
So, you know, the thing about those books are that they were written from conversations and experiences of other CRM people. So all those books that I've written, the resume book, building a career and all that stuff, it all comes from years and years of listening to other archaeologists. I just put it together, you know, and try to sell it for $4.99 so that it's portable, Kindle always, so that you can just have it on your phone at any time. So those are the ideas behind it. It's like, you know, open source, you know, materials. And now that you mention it, I should be having graduate students really should be reading that book, because
totally
I'm watching folks just get dropped into stuff, and it's kind of like, well, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to do, you know, a project in Nunavut, Canada on, you know, a heritage site or whatever. And they're like, okay, great, go do it and see you in 2 years. Like, hopefully you got your data. And I'm shaking my head like, wow, are you serious? Like, no one's going to really talk to them about the logistics of trying to do this, or, you know, what are some of the implications? Like, how are you going to budget it? How are you going to manage other people? And it doesn't seem like they're just like, no, it's all right, they'll make it. And you're shaking your head like, that's why graduation rate is like 60%, right?
Yep.
40% don't get any guidance whatsoever. And then after 6 years, they have no dissertation.
Yeah. And if you do manage to graduate, the retention rate is even less, because you're just thrown into the fire thinking you know stuff and you don't, and people ridicule you for it. So, yeah. Yeah. Yep.
So here, this isn't a book, but this is an article which we've brought up before, and everybody knows is one of my favorites. I mean, it's probably a lot of people's favorites, and that is The Golden Marshalltown, a parable for archaeology in the 1980s.
Yay!
It still rings so true. If you read it, I'm sure I was an archaeologist in the 1980s, but I'm an archaeologist now, and it rings true now. And it's such an enjoyable read. And I think it actually is one of those times where anytime you experience either talking to somebody, reading a book, or any kind of interaction where you're like, oh my goodness, you get me. You get where I'm sitting in life right now. You get my experience. And there's some solace in understanding that somebody else sees the world somewhat the same way you do. And this article does that. And I think, you know, I have dreams of how we present this article in the future as a podcast. But that, for anybody that has not read it before, it is an absolute must read.
I agree. The article that kept Andrew Kinkella in archaeology. I remember I was sick of all this crap, and I read it on a plane, and I was like, maybe I'll give it another try.
Too. On a plane, for those that know the article.
Yeah.
So apropos.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. It's I just gave a talk about it at the SCAs, and I saw a familiar face in the crowd.
That's right.
Shaking his head.
Shaking my head, angry, mouthing the word no constantly.
But it's a great article. Basically, for those that aren't familiar, it outlines in a very fun way 4 different personalities in archaeology. And I guess that or anthropology. I mean, it's really any of the social sciences, but mainly archaeology, that I don't know what that says about our profession, that all 4 of them still exist. Or maybe that this is such a good article.
They're archetypes too, know. I mean, they're always going to exist.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But it is, it's a great artitle.
Absolutely. Speaking of amazing authors, I was completely blown away by Archaeology is Awesome by Andrew Kinkella.
Yeah.
It was an amazing.
That was going to be my next one.
Yeah, it was amazing tour de force. It deserves its place on Amazon's number 1 list. But actually, and
the book cover is like the best.
Oh, the book cover is amazing. But actually, in seriousness, I did put it down as a book that influenced me, because I learned all about the publication process. Like I'd never been in that world before, in that way. Like we've done academic stuff, but this is, in the textbook world. So it was a really fascinating journey of learning the nuts and bolts of how the publication process works and what do you do at what time and how do you get images or this kind of thing. So it was a huge learning experience for me.
Nice.
Well, Chris.
Yeah.
Now I think we need to talk about Chris's book.
Yes, please. Because it's the only book that actually talks about the reality of being a field tech, which involves getting unemployment from multiple different states. Like, how do you do that? I actually asked my students, do they know how to get unemployment? And they just looked at me and I was like, ooh, you guys are in a lot of trouble.
So the name of the book is Field Archaeologist Survival Guide, Getting a Job and Working in Cultural Resource Management. Highly recommend.
I wanted a better title than that, something more snappy, but Left Coast Press wouldn't do it.
Well, but again, your book cover is eye catching, and the fact that it says survival guide, it's like archaeology for dummies type of a look. I think it works.
Well, yeah, thanks. And I had started putting together some. I guess before I even started writing a blog a long time ago, before I started the podcast, I had started putting together some resources when I first got into CRM because, everybody's heard my story before as well. But, I had very little CRM education, very little nuts and bolts archaeology education, just a lot of theory stuff in my undergrad. And it just wasn't a CRM heavy school. So when I finally got into CRM, I didn't even know how to use a screen. Right. Because I went to Africa for my field school and we basically had totally different kinds of screens and different procedures and different things. So I didn't even know how to use a standing shaker screen when I got to my first CRM project. I had to kind of wait until somebody else went over to the pit or to the back dirt pile and started screening and things like that. And I wanted to put together some more nuts and bolts stuff, living in hotel rooms and I was more concerned with retention. And that's what this book is all about. You're not going to learn anything about archaeology in this book. You're going to learn how to survive being a CRM archaeologist and what you need to do to stay in the field, because it does us no good to teach people about archaeology if they're just going to go work at the Gap. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So, yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
That was the thought behind that. I wish I could kind of redo it, but the Routledge now owns it, which is under Taylor and Routledge under Taylor and Francis, and they won't really release it. So I can do a second edition under somebody else. And, because I really don't want to do it under them either. But they're also not doing anything with it and they're not promoting it. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll have to do something completely different. So
yeah, I'm kind of curious. I know this isn't what this is for, but I am a little curious. How do you, how much of the title do you have to change in order to be able to write something, updated, if that's what you want to do?
Right.
Yeah, a lot.
All of it.
A lot.
All of it. Yeah. Yeah, I would have to change. And the good thing is there's so much more to write about, right? Like
Sure.
I did this. This was intended to be a smaller book. It was a series from Left Coast Press. And like I had a word limit and I pretty much hit that word limit. So because it was part of their, I can't remember. It's a series that they had and it was part of that. And that's how they got it in there. But there's so much more to write about. And I could take either some of those topics and greatly expand on them or write about, 50 other topics and still have, a decent resource, especially since this was like 8 years ago this month, I think, this or last month, and that it was published. I mean, there's just different things I could talk about now and updated stuff. So I've talked to my publisher from Left Coast Press. She left when Routledge took over because they basically cleaned shop, and she's now at Burgon Books, actually.
She's great, though.
Yeah, she's amazing. And I've talked to her about it. And if I had the time, we could probably do something that would be an update. But again, it would be a totally different title and not really affiliated. So,
well, if anyone is interested, so I'm working on writing something myself. I'm just kind of putting things together. But there's a book, another one by Brian Fagan called Writing Archaeology.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I have referred to that many times. That's another very good book where he really kind of, takes you down the road of what's important, and what you think is important probably isn't always a good thing to include in a book. So if anybody listening to this podcast is interested in writing for archaeology or writing a book, that's a good resource.
Oh, sorry. I use that a lot when I was writing my textbook. I looked back to Brian's, book on that.
Yeah.
It was really helpful.
I think speaking of that, Bill, go ahead. Sorry.
One of the things I wanted to say is, thinking about what we're writing and, how we're moving forward. What's interesting is who has influenced us is just, more of the main demographic of archaeologists, right? So these books that we're reading that people are cranking out, it's not really coming from indigenous communities, Hispanic communities. So one of the ones that when you start reading in that direction, then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that comes up that changes the entire way that you're practicing yourself, not teaching you how to just keep doing what we've already been doing, but do it in a different way. And a couple of books that I put on the list originally were Sonia Adelay's Community-Based Archaeology, which is a great book that talks about her own experiences. And it really, it totally shaped the way that I'm doing my kind of research. And then there's a newer one that's edited by Keisha Supernaut, Jane Eva Baxter, Natasha Lyons, and Sonia Adelay called Archaeologies of the Heart. And Archaeologies of the Heart is one that actually changes the entire way you feel about archaeology and what you're even doing. Because it's so easy to get into that grind set where you're just, got to get money, got to get food on the table, and like, where am I going to find my next job? How's this all going to work? But when you start thinking about, what this is actually doing to you as an archaeologist, what this is doing to communities, if you continue in this direction, and then the different way that you can go, where you can actually kind of listen to what your emotions and what your body's telling you, rather than just purely following, where am I going to dig the next hole? What feature is this? What mining site is this? Right. So that book came out a couple of years ago, and I read it and I just couldn't stop reading it. And, the people who were in it are talking about all kinds of different things on a lot of different sites around the world, and just kind of the emotional impact of doing archaeology. And that really, after having done it for 20 years, it's too bad I did archaeology for 20 years without reading this book, right? Well, it wasn't around when I first started, but, it did really kind of change. Like, if I were to go back to cultural resources, it would change the way that I write and think about sites and the way I describe them. And fortunately, the National Historic Preservation Act is flexible enough for you to fit a lot of the stuff that comes in this book. It doesn't have to sound touchy-feely. Like, the law was designed that you can quite easily add this kind of perspective in, and it doesn't have to just be, what kind of ceramics are there, what jars are there, how many flakes do we see. It can be something deeper.
Well, the forums have interpretation, and they have actual areas where you can get a little bit more into the not so material portion of describing a site.
Right.
Yeah. And also, like, the data potential thing is like, we have been calling data just flakes and sherds and rocks and stone piles, right? But we haven't actually been talking about the other cultural data because most of the time we don't ever read any of that stuff. So we don't actually, in fact, know it.
Right.
Right.
I wanted to give one more shout out to one other book that's very hard to place in any of this stuff, because we've talked about like historical archaeology, we've talked about more prehistoric archaeology, but I got to say that Ken Fader's Frauds, Myths, and Mysteries was a huge one for me, because it was another one that was like, oh wait, you can do that, and he did a great job of talking about pseudo archaeology, which we tend to be in our little archaeology hole, and we forget that the general public, many people believe in Atlantis, or these kind of things, or Bigfoot or whatever. And Ken goes and debunks these things, but in a really fun, really interesting way. That was a book that I kind of read and reread several times.
Nice. Well, I think that's about all we have time for, but I think what we ought to do, because I feel like we've talked about this subject before, but with 3 people on the show right now that have published, Heather's writing something right now that she wants to publish. It sounds like it's high time for us to have another podcast about how to get published in archaeology, because I know we all did it in slightly different ways. I never set out to write a book, to be honest with you. I had a collection of blog posts in a PDF that I happened to show Left Coast at a conference and just say, has anything like this been published? And they're like, no, but we'll do it. I was like, it's going to make it an ebook or something.
That's what's great about Left Coast. I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, they were so willing to just do that. And so, but anyway, I think talking about these experiences, and then, the different ways that we have published, and then how to kind of get into that. If you want to write something, maybe what the best avenues are. Maybe a book isn't the best thing for you to do. Maybe an ebook, or like a book on the shelf kind of thing.
Right.
But we should talk about that. It sounds like a good topic. So, all right. Well, as I said, there are a lot of things that we didn't even get to in the show notes for this podcast, and it is going to be a bear to post, but it is going to be fun. There's a lot of stuff in here. So this is an excellent resource. And please, if you find anything helpful in here, share this podcast or share the link to it on your socials. You can find us at ArcPodNet on Twitter, Facebook, and at our website, arcpodnet.com/CRM Archaeology Podcast. Or it might just be CRM Arc Podcast. I don't know. Go to arcpodnet.com and you'll find it. All right. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRM Arc Podcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you guys next time.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.